When I decided to start playing Psychonauts, I did not expect it would make me think about a whole lot. I didn't expect a cartoony 3D platformer about a summer camp for psychic children to have a strong socio-political message. And I still don't worry, I'm not gonna call Psychonauts a biting social critique, I do have some self-awareness left. It was precisely because this game doesn't have much in the way of overt political messaging though, that it struck me as weird when the game does occasionally hint at some very real and very bad stuff that US government institutions used to or still engage in. Not because it has a very detailed point to make about those things, but because it shows how much certain horrible things have apparently been so normalized that their inclusion in a work that's otherwise largely uncritical of United States institutions of power doesn't even seem weird to most people. Psychonauts takes place at a summer camp for psychically gifted children that's really just a recruitment and training tool for a US government agency known as the Psychonauts. The first thing we see in the game is a pep talk given by Coach Oleander, an ex-military commander who talks to these literal children in very militaristic terms.
From this day forward, you are all psychic soldiers, paranormal paratroopers, mental marines who are about to ship out on the adventure of their lives. This is our beachhead!
Not long after that, the first training exercise for these children takes place inside the mind of Coach Oleander and takes the form of an obstacle course that is literally inside of his traumatic war memories. Given what little we learn about the actual activities of Psychonaut agents throughout the game, it seems they mostly use their psychic powers to do stereotypical, dangerous, probably illegal spy stuff on behalf of the US government. And again, all of this is wrapped in the disguise of a fun summer camp for children. Raz, the protagonist of the game, even makes it clear that he's at the camp because of a recruitment flyer that made it clear he could get away from his controlling dad by joining the Psychonauts. So this organization is apparently intentionally targeting kids from bad environments, suggesting their recruitment as a way out. So, the Psychonauts are in intelligence/military organizations, i.e. the enforcers of US imperialism, white supremacy, heterosis patriarchy, and capitalistic class oppression, i.e. like bad people who enforce all the US's oppressive systems abroad, who recruit literal children with the promise of being a fun escape from a bad environment. And the game doesn't focus on that at all, even though it's a chillingly accurate mirror of how the real US military recruits young people to do the destructive, dangerous, and traumatizing work of expanding the US empire. They are literally allowed to recruit kids at high school job fairs, they've recently started to recruit #gamers via Twitch, they use mainstream movies as recruitment tools, including those with a young skewing audience, and they're in the habit of recruiting people with poor financial prospects, representing the army as a way out of that. So you think the game is making some sort of satire here, but I don't think it is, because this is really only treated as a background detail. Something that also feels like it should be satire, but is actually presented quite neutrally, is the game's focus on mental health, and what is done with it. The Psychonauts are literally shown to be able to treat mental illnesses by going inside people's brains and solving some kind of metaphorical representation of their mental health issues. You even pick up literal mental baggage in the game, it's cute. Given that this game takes place in the US, a country with an enormous mental health epidemic and no treatment options that aren't insanely expensive, it is interesting that these powers are not primarily used to treat people with mental illness. Raz does end up doing that in the game, but only because he needs to on the way to saving his campmates, and the actual Psychonaut agents are, again, only shown to be doing stereotypical spy shit. This really feels like it should be satire, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is unrealistic, quite the opposite. Given the country's current priorities, it is extremely believable that if the US had access to a team of highly skilled psychics that could more or less cure pretty much any mental illness, they would use them for intelligence and/or military purposes exclusively, and not to treat their tremendous amounts of mentally ill citizens. But this is never portrayed as a bad aspect of the Psychonauts, and Raz gleefully joins them at the end of the game. It feels less like intentional satire and more like something we're just supposed to accept as a given. Then there's Sasha 9, a Psychonaut scientist/agent with a thick German accent who is implied to do horrific experiments on children. That last part turns out not to be true, but it still seems like they're making a reference to the US government's famous recruital of Nazi scientists after World War II. The most reliable way for a Nazi to avoid trial after the war was to be a scientist, and to let themselves be recruited for US military purposes. This is what happened to people like Wernher von Braun, who was instrumental in the early days of NASA, and who also did some work for Walt Disney. Like, seriously, you can see him being interviewed in a documentary that you can currently watch on Disney+, which is a bit beside the point, but also wild. The point is that this is just a passing reference to the US recruitment of literal war criminals that the game just makes and then shrugs off, with Sasha being a protagonist for the rest of the game. There's a few other smaller references like these to America's dark side. For example, there's a joke about the camp being built on Indian burial grounds, but like they only buried arrowheads there, not people, but still seems to be some kind of sacred ground. There's a reference to the fact that the camp used to punish children by putting them in solitary confinement, an inhumane, torturous method of punishment that the US uses to this day. There's the hugely polluted lake that's right next to the camp, but it's never even commented on. Like, yeah, the US allows rivers to be polluted, it's just part of the all-American setting of the game, don't worry about it. If you'll allow me to get way up my own ass about this all reminds me of what Mark Fisher remarks about a concept called the Big Other in his 2009 book, Capitalist Realism. When a system or institution is destructive or inefficient or otherwise detrimental in some way, and really everyone kinda knows that, it needs to construct a big other in order to keep justifying its existence, an imagined populace that doesn't know about all the bad parts to obfuscate that in reality, everyone already knows about them. As an example, he talks about the White Sea Canal project, a huge visible symbol of development in Stalin's Soviet Union, which was really quite shit. It was supposed to be a giant infrastructure triumph, but the canal could only really support a few tourist boats. The workers knew this, the populace also kinda knew this, the international community probably at least suspected it, and Stalin and the party definitely knew it. Nevertheless, Stalin made sure there was only positive press around it, and so everyone could pretend that people didn't know it was a failure, and it could continue to be used as a positive example of Soviet efficiency and progress. Capitalism has needed to construct its own big other as well. Most people kinda know about many of the inherent inefficiencies of free market capitalism, like the duplication of work inherent to competition, the inequitous outcomes of it, its failure to meaningfully improve living conditions worldwide, its destructive boom and bust cycle, and the fact that despite its opposition to big state bureaucracy, it has brought about a corporate bureaucracy to rival even the Soviet Union at the height of Stalin's power. So much that Fisher dubs this phenomenon market Stalinism. This is of course a problem for capitalism, a system that's supposed to provide, above all else, efficiency. So capitalism needs an intelligentsia of people proclaiming its virtues against all practical evidence, not so much to actually convince people that capitalism is efficient and fair, but to convince everyone that there's a public consensus about it. Because once it's clear that a lot of people also can't see the emperor's clothes, that's when, as Fisher puts it, the incorporeal fabric holding the social system together disintegrates. When you get the impression that everyone else does see the emperor's clothes, however, it becomes easier to convince yourself that they must be there after all. It's a bit like gaslighting on a societal scale. I think this concept is illuminating when it comes to Psychonauts. The many atrocities that have been and are committed by the US military and intelligence community are a public secret, so in order to not lose all public support, they have to construct a big other, a populace that doesn't know about the torture and the assassination of civil rights leaders and the deposing of democratically elected leaders in foreign countries. The developers of Psychonauts seemingly also knew about the atrocities of the US military and intelligence operations, but they wouldn't state them confidently, because there's a big other who is presumed not to know. There's probably a consensus that the imperialist arm of the US is actually good, right? So let's not go against that, maybe we're wrong after all. The truth is, most of us, or at least a lot of us, do know the truth, and it would probably only be good to confidently say it out loud a bit more often. Hello there, and thank you for watching this video to the end. There's a good chance you're one of the 1,000 almost subscribers I've gained since my last video, so in that case, welcome. If you're new here, hi, I'm Bram. I make videos about politics, media, usually both, but really whatever I feel like. If that sounds like something you could be interested in, then maybe consider subscribing or watching something else of mine. Or liking, or you get the drill, engagement for the algorithm. Okay, bye.